Hello, and welcome to the Tucson Festival of Books, the teen and tween audio interviews. I'm Amy Morris. I'm with the Pima County Public Library, and here we have the Sabino High School literary group, and they will introduce themselves and the author.
Hi, I'm Faith.
I'm Danielle.
I'm Haley.
I'm Savannah.
And I am author Angeline Boulley. My debut novel is Firekeeper's Daughter.
So my first question for you is, when writing the storyline, did you have opposing sides of yourself and as a reader and a writer that wanted the plot to go in different directions?
I worked on the book for 10 years, and so I would say I got to try different versions of the story. And so there's a version out there where Donis makes all the right decisions, and she ended up being a little boring. And then there are versions where she makes so many poor decisions, really struggles. I would say there was a version where I didn't want Donis and Jamie. I didn't want Donis to like Jamie at all, but it just didn't work. It was like those two crazy kids had to be together, or had to find their way to each other. So yeah, I would say there were times where I wanted the story to go a different way, but when you trust your characters, when you trust that you did the work to create these characters, if they're steering you in a different direction, you kind of have to take that leap of faith with them.
This goes kind of in a different route, but I hear that it's getting adapted on screen, and I was wondering, like, how do you feel about that? Do you want to add things to it so it grows from what's in the book, or do you think it would stay pretty similar?
I hope that it stays similar. I'm so excited about it. So it's being adapted for a Netflix series by Higher Ground Productions, which is the company started by Barack and Michelle Obama. And so it's being envisioned as a series, and that season 1 would be, probably following Firekeeper's Daughter. But my second book has a different main character. And so the thought is that the series would continue to follow Donis. So season 2 would be a new adventure for her. Whereas for books, I wanted to challenge myself as an author. And so I wanted to get into the mind of a different character, because I've had Donis in my mind since I was 18. So, we're talking 37 years. So I was ready to explore a different character, and I really thought Donis would be more interesting as a secondary character, as someone that, you might see in the book too. But I didn't necessarily want to write for her, which makes the series, the Netflix series, exciting to see how that progresses. Yeah.
Do you think that your mindset has changed about the book from its conception when you were younger to who you are as a person now? Do you think your wisdom and your life experience has kind of shaped and influenced the plot as a result?
Yes, exactly. Great question. It's, I think it always had the same beginning, always the same ending, and I always knew who one of the villains was. But the story over the 10 years that I was writing it, got each draft, the layers got deeper, and it started to be less about the plot and more about the internal journey that Donis is on, and me realizing that's really where the heart of the story was. And I would say that probably, yes, my life experiences and my career in Indian education, working in different tribal communities, definitely gave me those experiences that I could draw upon, and write the story that the way that it needed to be. I think maybe had an earlier draft gotten published, it might have been more of a happy ending, or it might have been not as challenging. Whereas I think, life experience, it's like, okay, I didn't promise you a happy ending, I promised you a satisfying ending, and knowing what the difference is and why that is.
This book has so many beautiful layers and so many intricate details that when reading it, it's just, it unravels like perfectly. What does your planning process look like with so many intricate details?
A lot of it was just starting a new draft and finding parts of the story, but then at a certain point I realized I needed to be more organized about it. And I'm organized about other things too, so I outline in Excel, so a spreadsheet, and so I have a column for, the plot, the themes, the characters, the weather, what they're wearing, all these different things, and then each row is a different chapter, so then I could kind of keep track, and I even would know where other characters were if they weren't on the page. Like, there would be notes in their column of like what they were off doing, so that I could just kind of keep everything straight. And really having that column for the day and the time and all of that. And I would even look up what time the sun would rise that day back in 2004, just to make sure I was like, okay, this could take place. I can reference this time because I know that I did that extra step of, having it be realistic.
Okay. Did you expect your book to take off like it did? And if not, who were you hoping the message of accepting yourself and finding the entirety of your character as an Indigenous person would reach?
Okay. So originally, that was my target audience, to write for Indigenous teens. And then the more that I got into writing, I wanted to, and as my career in Indian education continued, I saw the need not just to have the story be for Indigenous teens, like they were my primary audience, but I needed to think more broadly, because I wanted to have non-Native teens read the story and understand things more. And so I wanted as wide a market reach as I could get. So I knew that it had to be a broader audience. Let's see. Can you say your question again? I want to make sure I captured it.
Yeah, I said, and did you expect your book to take off like it did? And if not, who were you hoping the message of your book would read?
Okay. So I just had this unshakable faith that if I kept at improving my writing skills to be worthy of this story idea that I had complete faith that it would get published. The better my writing got over those 10 years, and I saw the improvements in my storytelling, I thought it would be, like, I was sure it would get published by a big five. I just didn't expect it to be the lead title and for it to land the way that it did. That, yeah. Yeah, the 12 imprint auction for the book, that was mind-blowing. And then 2 weeks later, the same process happened with 8 development companies that were interested in adapting it for either a feature film or a series. And so I kind of thought, oh, all right, this is going to be big. But I didn't know it would be this vague.
Yeah.
I don't know how to prepare for what happened.
Thank you.
So there's a lot of dark things that happen in the book, and I was wondering, was there any time where you had to pause or just take a moment to yourself while writing these? Like, did it ever get to you when you're writing, or?
It did, and that's why it was so important to include the joyful things that happen in my community and the ways in which community members look out for one another, the humor, the parts about the elders, their involvement in the story. There were a lot of positive things that I wanted to convey about my community. And so I didn't want the focus to be on the trauma. I really wanted to show a more layered, a more nuanced, a more complex depiction of my community. Something that captured the great things as well as the unpleasant truths that are true not just for my community but for other communities too. Grappling with, drugs and violence against women.
Now, going off of like elder characters, how did you approach writing out like more complex elderly characters in fiction and the lack of those figures in present YA?
Well, my career, in addition to Indian education, for a while I had a position in my tribe where, in addition to education, I also oversaw our elder division. And so I would eat lunch with our senior citizens, once or twice a week. I would do that. And just getting to know them and just how smart and funny and interesting and, ornery and just all these different things. And it made sense to include them because they're an important part of our community. And I wanted to show them in a light that they haven't been portrayed before. So I wanted them to be active in the mystery of it and in the, spoiler, the scene on the ferry and, all the ways in which like you're just cheering for the elders. I just thought it was respectful of who they are as dynamic people.
If Donis hadn't met Jamie or hadn't been involved like she had been, do you think she would have uncovered the secrets that her brother was hiding or anything in the town, really?
I like to think that she would have figured out that something was going on. Well, especially too, like, even though she didn't use that credit card or her debit card very often on the joint account, I think that at some point things wouldn't have added up. And then two, at some point they would have wanted her to be involved. So I think that she would have figured out that something was going on. She wouldn't have known about her uncle being an informant before her.
In your book, you mentioned that when making decisions, you're supposed to think 7 generations ahead. Was that something that you had in your mindset, writing the book and writing your people?
Yes, because that's a really powerful teaching in Ojibwe culture is, you're part of a community, so you think more broadly than yourself. And just that whole idea where Donis realizes that the FBI wants to find out who the criminal is, and then they're going to go to another community. They're going to do another investigation. But for Donis, it's her community, and she has to live there. And so her thinking, she's the only one that's thinking that 7 generations ahead, like what's going to happen to her community after everything after all of this comes out. So, yeah.
If you could speak to any of your characters in real life, who would it be and what would you say to them?
Oh, God, I've never been asked that question before, and it's so interesting. Wow, that's really good. Macy. I felt like Macy was one of these characters that she's not in a lot of scenes, but any scene that she is in, she kind of owns it. And I would want to know what was going through her mind and what, how these events unfolded and her take on everything.
So if Donis hadn't experienced the death of Lily and hadn't been introduced to the meth crisis in her community, where do you think the life would be at?
I think she would have, gone to college for pre-med, and I think she would have followed that path, and that's where she would be at. And I think she would I think that her claiming and celebrating her identity as biracial, I think that might have taken a longer time for her to get to that point of accepting and celebrating all the parts of her identity. I think that the experiences that she went through in the story kind of prompted that, where she realized that it was when she claimed her identity and accepted all these different parts of her that she really came into her strength. And so I think that maybe accelerated that acceptance, the traumatic events in the story. So I think, if Lily hadn't died, I think, she would have gone on to med school and probably still struggled with trying to balance that Fontaine world and Firekeeper world for Native and non-Native families.
Which character did you find hardest to develop or continue their storyline, if you had any?
I think Donis's mom was a little, once I kind of figured out then, but she was difficult because I have a very good relationship with my mother, so I wasn't drawing upon anything. And just the way that a parent can be loving and maybe smothering, and how that can hold a person back. And then realizing that Donis needed to see her mother's strengths and realize that her mother was a strong person. It just was a quieter strength to survive the things that she had gone through. I think that's, the mom is a hard character to write.
If you yourself were in the book, how do you think you would have fit into the plot as a character?
I would be Aunt Teddy. Yeah. And someday I want to be Minnie Mustang. So I have a red sports car, so I'm almost there.
When you're writing the book, how did you keep yourself inspired?
I would have dreams about the story, and I would wake up that in between time of sleep and wake, things would come to me in that in between time, like the perfect line of dialogue or the answer to a question of, okay, how can I get these characters into this place because this needs to happen, and I'd be stuck on that. So and character insights. I would wake up with this, a revelation about a character, and it was like, wow, that totally makes sense. And so I really loved waking up with story, and that helped me. I would be excited to get up and start writing because of what had come to me, and through that sleep.
So Travis and many other characters in the book struggle with substance abuse due to the prevalence of meth in the community, which can be seen in our present day as well. What would you say to people struggling with addiction or have experienced addiction firsthand?
That they're loved, and that their loved ones want them to get help, and that it's a lot of times it's one step forward and 3 back, and just to keep trying. The addiction, it's so, I think there's so much that we really don't understand about it, and the need to self-medicate and avoid dealing with wounds that are just too painful. I think mental health in our country is something that doesn't get enough attention or resources, or so yeah, I think that a lot of addiction is untreated trauma.
Which character do you relate to most or look up to most, and why?
Probably Aunt Teddy. Yeah, she's inspired by my first job out of college. I worked in a tribal community, and these 2 sisters, one was a coworker, and then one was a boss of mine. And for some reason, they just took me under their wings, and they just invited me to community events, and I just thought they were so together. I just thought they were like the kind of strong Ojibwe woman that I wanted to be, but I felt like kind of a mess. And then as I got to know them, and they would tell me, kind of their stories, I realized that they were just as messed up as I was at my age, in my early 20s, and that there was hope for me to kind of, get myself together and pursue an exciting career and be very community minded, and be strong in my culture, and so yeah, that's every community I've ever been in, worked or lived, there just seemed to be Indigenous women, Native women who just their leadership is a community-minded leadership, and it's not competitive. It's like your success doesn't take away from mine, and so I cheer you on, and that's yeah. I'm really inspired by Ojibwe women who just know what they want, and are willing to say the tough thing, take the strong action to address issues, and that they're motivated by their family, their children, their community, and other children in the community.
What were your connections to your tribe growing up? Did you have multiple connections, and how did they shape your experience writing the book?
My dad left the tribal community as a young man to join the Navy, and then he met my mom, who's not Native, in Chicago. And so then we went up to our grandparents on the reservation every summer, and my grandmother had this house, a little tar paper tiny house on Sugar Island, and that's where we would stay. And I just remember it being like one of my favorite places, and taking the ferry over to the island was just wonderful. And I can still smell like the campfire and the smell of the house. And there's a lot of really good memories with it. And so we always had a connection with our tribe through our family, and then connection to the land. So I own the 10 acres that house had been on. And so it's just neat to have that connection. And then I ended up working for my tribe for about 12 years, and lived in the area for about 15.
Is there anything that you wanted to say about the book that no one has ever asked you before?
Well, your one question was one I'd never been asked before. No, I'm just always so thankful, appreciative of when someone, reads the book and it means something to them, or when they get something out of the story that maybe I put in and didn't think anyone would get. For example, the medicine wheel. Ojibwe teachings use the medicine wheel. And in addition to the 4 directions, there's the 4 colors. And when dawn is, there are significant scenes in each of the 4 acts, and the color of her clothing in those key scenes ties to the color of that direction on the medicine wheel. And so that's just like a little thing that I put in there just to, as like another teaching, just a way to put like the 4 traditional colors in there, and the medicines and directions. So I just like the different ways that I could infuse the story with the culture.
So, do you think that there's going to be a future for Donis and Jamie? Do you think that they'll be able to, grow but also come together?
Okay, so I am working on book 2, and book 2 is set in a different year and has a different main character, but you will see familiar faces, which is all that I can say in response to that question.
There's a lot of interesting characters in this book, and a lot of strong female characters, as you said. Were there any characters that you wrote that were inspired by people that you know in your life?
So Granny June was inspired by my cousin Elaine's grandma, and I would take her to garage sales to look for James Michener hardcover books. So that was like an aspect that I had been June be. Stormy is probably one of my favorite characters, if not my favorite character. And originally he was going to be a villain, but there was something about him that was so, reminded me of different students that I've worked with over the years, and reminded me of one of my son's friends. And I just, my heart was with that, with Stormy, and I just wanted a different ending for him. And I wanted to show, like, throughout the story, people kind of write him off because of his family situation. But to see that at the end of the story, his family is intact and they are with him for what he's going through, and their connection to the culture and the language and to ceremony is so strong. And I wanted him to have that strength, and maybe people who meet a student like Stormy maybe think about what strengths they actually do have, because it's easy to write off somebody based on factors that just, yeah.
Your sequel is said to be an indigenous Lara Croft, where the main character raids museums to bring the ancestors home. Is it set in the same area or tribe as Donis's? Like, does it have the same amount of tribal involvement, or is it more focused on one person and their family?
It is set in the same tribal community, different main character, but there's some connections to everything. And if you reread the story knowing what book 2 is going to be, you can guess who the main character is. I put some Easter eggs in there.
I'll look up those.
So Donna has a lot of love in her life, as you said, and joy, as well as what happened in the book. But how do you think that within her community she's going to grow from what happened in this book and deal with all the deaths that did happen and just move on, or not move on, but like grow from it?
Yeah. I think that her finding healing through ceremonies, through the culture, through that connection to family, I think those are things that I felt good about, like where Donna ends the story, even though you don't know what's going to happen at University of Hawaii and you don't know what's going to happen after graduation, but you know, you have a feeling that she's going to be okay, that she's learned how to, accept all of the parts of her personality, her identities, and you have a feeling that she's going to be able to figure things out and adapt to difficult situations and seek out help. And I felt like I left Donis in a really good place.
What do you think was the hardest part of writing the book? Did you have any setbacks?
I would say the hardest part probably was like writing about the sexual assault, because I had very clear reasons of why it would be in the story. And my editor really helped me about, what to include on the page and what to fade to black. And she also gave me good advice about, this might be the first time a young reader is reading about a sexual assault happening to a character. It might be triggering. Maybe they or a friend have experienced something similar. And so she said, she gave me guidance to give the reader breathing room. So I hadn't ever thought about that part, about not piling on more stuff, but just to give that reader some pause. And that was really good advice from my editor.
Are there any authors that you look up to or are inspired by, and if so, please?
There's an author named Marcy Rendon, and she is White Earth Ojibwe, and she writes this series. It's called the Cash Black Bear Mystery Series. The first book is called Murder on the Red River. Her books aren't young adult, but they're like right on that cusp of adult that I would recommend, to young adult readers. And I love her writing. It's very descriptive, and you feel like that you're right there seeing and sensing everything that's happening. And my dad says that she writes the way Ojibwe people see the world, and so I think that's true. Cherie Dimeline is a First Nations author from Canada, and she's the author of The Marrow Thieves, which is probably my favorite book of all. And I was able to read an early copy of the sequel to it, and I was able to do a author blurb. So like there's a quote from me on the book cover now. But, and that's like that's a perk of being an author that I hadn't thought about, but now that I know that it's really cool, because I also got to read an early version of Courtney Summers' latest book, I'm the Girl, and I got to read Melissa Albert's new book too. So just, yeah, I like getting to read the early copies, and yeah.
Donis is written as a very strong, like, protector sort of character. Was it ever hard for you to write her being more sensitive and relying on other people, because she, like, protects, like, Lily and her nieces and her mom especially?
That was part of her journey was to, you know, accepting her vulnerabilities and asking for help. And that was always going to be part of it, because I didn't want Donis to fall into that like savior complex of having one person, you know, do all of these things. That's another reason why the elders were so important, and asking elders for help, and you know, different things like that I thought were really important, to not have a team feel like they have to go do everything. I think it's a sign of strength to ask for help, and to have the community be part of the problem solving instead of one person deciding what's best for the community. And, you know, her realizing that doesn't really help the community in the long run. That was an important part of her journey.
When you were writing the book, you said there were some parts you were set on, like the beginning and the end, but for the climax, were you set on Donna surviving, or was there ever a point where you thought maybe she could have died for that point?
Maybe I toyed with the idea a little bit, but no, I wanted her to survive and have that calling of the ethnobotany, of studying plants as medicines, and doing so from a school that got it about seeing the world with indigenous eyes, and that value and respect and appreciation of that different cultural lens in the field. I thought that was like a really great that it would make sense for Donis, that after the things in the story, you want the ending to be something where you're like, oh, okay, that actually does make sense, and be happy for her being on that path.
So the book has really heavy themes of science and plants and medicine. Was there any outside research you had to do to acquire that information? Was there any previous knowledge that you had?
I had to do a lot of research. That wasn't an area that I knew a lot about, but I remember talking with my cousins, and I was, you know, telling them about writing the book, and then I said, do you know of any, like, old-timey medicines that our grandmas would do? Because my dad had told me before that his mom would boil a huge kettle and have rags in there, and put some medicines, some plants, some different things in there, boil it, and then wring it out, and then wrap it around the kids' necks when they would go out to school. And it was supposed to keep them from getting sick. And I think what worked was that it was so stinky that I think it was like social distancing back in the day. So, yeah. So I was talking to my cousins and asked about old-timey medicines like that. And my cousin Samantha said, oh, yeah, one time Grandma Nancy fixed my earache with my pee. And I was like, wait, what? And then she said, you know, the ferry, I was over at their house, and the ferry was shut down. And so Grandma Nancy, you know, had me pee into a cup, and she poured it in my ear, and my earache got better. And then, and she said, I looked it up later and found out that urine is sterile and that it can be used as a substitute for hydrogen peroxide. And I was like, see, our elders are like this indigenous knowledge. They knew that. And then when we get that confirmation or that validation that, oh yes, scientifically this does check out, it's kind of like we already knew that, and I wish it didn't take that scientific validation to then we respect the old-timey medicine. So yeah. So I thought that was really, I wanted to put that in the book because I thought that was so, that it was so cool.
There are many aspects of community in the book, and it's really interesting to read, especially in a lot of the scenes, such as the elders on the ferry and stuff. What is your favorite aspect of community for you?
Just when I go back to Sault Ste. Marie and I get together with my cousins, and maybe we'll go out or maybe we'll go over to someone's house and play cards and beverages and before long we're just like laughing so hard that your side hurts, that kind of a laughter, and there's just nothing like that of just that you're connected to these people, and there's like that history, and knowing that our grandmas sat around at a table playing cards, laughing like this too, and there's just something that it feels really good. Yeah.
Spoiler, Travis dies. He kills himself and Lily. Would Travis have had more of a development as a character if he had lived through the drug investigation?
Yeah, I would like to think that maybe he could have gotten help or been, at his rock bottom, chosen a different way than that. But I also wanted the story to address teen dating violence and unhealthy relationship patterns, and I wanted that to be in there because we see that more and more of young women's first relationships, dating relationships. It's really hard to fathom more young women are experiencing dating violence than ever before, and so I wanted that in there.
You said you came up with this book, or the idea came to you when you were younger, but did you always knew that you were going to be a writer someday?
No, I didn't. I always was good at writing. Anytime an exam was an essay exam, I knew I would do well. But no, I didn't know that I would be a writer. I mean, I had that idea for a story, but it took a long time for it to kind of gel and to have all the pieces in place of like, oh, well, it could be this, that would work, that would be a good story. So yeah, I had not always known that I wanted to be a writer. I think maybe it was a dream, but something maybe I talked myself out of, thinking, about how hard it would be to try to make a living, that, okay, it's something to pursue in your spare time, but and now I think there's so many ways to be involved with publishing, with books, with storytelling, that now I think there is a lot more options for people to pursue it.
How was it like writing some of the more sinister characters of the story, like Levi and Mike and his dad? Was there a certain process that you had to put yourself through to write those characters, or a lens that you had to really think about what they would do in those situations?
That's a really great question, and the answer is yes. Every villain believes they're the hero of their story, and so trying to find out what that motivation was for that character, how that character could rationalize or justify their actions. And I also did research of drug-related crimes in other tribal communities because I worried about a reader maybe saying, oh, you made this up, this would never happen, a tribal judge wouldn't, rule harshly against, wouldn't let a drug dealer go, that wouldn't happen. And I wanted to be able to say of any of the crimes, yes, that happened. So I did find a reservation where the tribal judge was female and had been found guilty of misconduct as a tribal judge and giving milder sentences or throwing out cases that involved a family member's drug operations and doing harsh sentences on the competition. And so that was a real thing. And then I also read about a young man from a different tribal community, and he was a huge drug dealer on the reservation. And his justification was, there's all this money, it should be going to a tribal business, or why should we pay an outsider to come in? Like, if people are going to spend money on drugs, it should be support a tribal business or a tribal member's, enterprise. And so just how you can hear something and be like, wow, that's kind of skewed, or that's, but that character has to fully believe that to justify the decisions that they make and the slippery slope that they get on, where then they're, wanting their sister held, captive until she promises that she's going to make meth for them. So, yeah. So I did have to research actual crimes. I did have to research how to make meth, how to identify clandestine meth labs, interviewed retired FBI agents, IRS agents. Like, I had to do my research so that it would be plausible. So, yeah.
Connecting to Haley's question, Levi is a character that I don't know about you guys, but I fell in love with at the beginning, and then towards the end, his demise. What was it like writing his turnaround, and was it ever difficult for you?
I felt really strongly about Levi because I felt like he was treated as like the golden boy of the reservation, and we do have a lot of those. And Levi being a star athlete, and I think athletes do get preferential treatment in a lot of ways, and we do such a disservice by that, because then we have people who end up grown up who don't know, who have never had to face consequences for their actions, and that they've been protected. And that's, so I really wanted to show him all the ways, the advantages that he had, and the ways that people cut him so many breaks, and that he didn't have to, like, for example, having Travis take the blame for shooting the window, the BB gun, and, injuring someone, and then Travis is the one that faces the consequences and that takes his life in a different direction, and Levi never had to, so that was really important for me, was to show that. I have a question for you guys. Who is your favorite elder? Would you, if you had a free Saturday, would you rather go for a joyride with Minnie Mustang, or go bottle picking with John Z. Layden, or medicine picking with Simi Ninti, or garage sales with Granny June.
Personally, my favorite elder was the one who went bottle picking. I think in many ways he could be overlooked because he's only in there for a small part, but he was my favorite. But I think it would be more fun to go hang out with Granny June.
I really liked Minnie, so I would have to say the Joyride because I feel like that'd be very fun. Just hanging out with her. She was a cool character. I really liked her.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I feel like maybe she'd go a little bit slower in the Mustang, but I could really crank up the volume and just jam out the entire time. I think the audio would be pretty good. Yeah, I agree with them. I think she's such an outspoken character, and she just says what's on her mind, and I really respect that of her.
Thank you.